All right, hey guys, and welcome to a new video. Today we have the Sony A7 V with the 28-70 f2, and we're going to be doing a full, comprehensive, real experience review on the camera. This is a camera I've been super excited for quite a long time. I actually even sold my FX3 and 3 of my A7C2s to buy this one and one more. So I've actually got two Sony A7 Vs now and the A9 III filming. So today what we're going to do is we're going to do video tests, we're going to do photo tests, and really just get into the nitty gritty of everything there is to know about the Sony A7 V. All right, let's get into it, guys. All right, I'm going to start with the most controversial thing first. Yes, I sold my FX3 and I bought this, the Sony A7 V. And I know some people are going to hear that and think, bro, what are you doing? But after actually taking this camera out and using it properly, night shoots, handheld, walking, mixed lighting, stills and video back to back, I genuinely think this is the most practical hybrid camera going into 2026. This reminds me of when I first moved to Sony after leaving Canon. Back when I had the R5 and the R6 and they were overheating, and then I bought the A7S III and it made me fall in love with shooting again. The A7 V is giving me that same feeling, and I'm all for it. Now, let's be clear. This is not the most extreme camera. It's not the biggest spec monster. But for me, it is the most usable, most do everything, most grab and go camera I've used so far. That still feels premium. And that's because Sony finally stopped making a camera that can do great things, but with annoying compromises, instead made a camera that does everything with minimal compromises. I'm also shooting the A7 V right now. All right, guys, we are currently shooting on the A7 V, and I've got to be honest, this has to be my all-time new favorite camera. While I love the A9 III, considering the price of the Sony A7 V, it has been absolutely amazing to shoot with. I absolutely loved the Sony A7 IV. I absolutely loved the Sony A7C2, but it lacked in some departments, especially the 4K 50/60 where there was a crop. The APS-C crop was something that I really didn't like. Now we have no crop on the 4K 50 and 60. Now there is an option where you can have a crop if you want noise reduction added. I've actually removed that completely and I don't see a difference, to be honest. I love it. I'm so grateful, and honestly, the autofocus is next level. The AI chip in these cameras are absolutely bar none. Now, is it perfect? Of course not. Does a perfect camera exist? Definitely not. But this one gets pretty close. Now, let's talk value in Australia. The Sony A1 II is about $9,999. The A7 V is around $4,700. And its closest rival, the Canon R6 Mark III, sits at around 4,000 Australian dollars. So between the A7 IV and the R6 III, you're looking at roughly a $700 difference. Now, we'll come back to that a little later. But comparing this to the Sony flagship A1 II, you're paying about half the price, and for real-world shooting, you're getting a lot of that flagship experience for half the price. Now, before the comments explode, yes, the A1 II is still the king. If you need 8K and absolute no compromise, high frame rates, then the A1 II is probably for you. But let me be honest, most people don't need 8K. I definitely don't. What I need is a camera that lets me shoot photo and video without thinking about it. No overheating, enough megapixels, sticky autofocus, and good battery life. Also, clean low light, and file sizes that don't make me hate editing. And that's exactly what the A7 V is built around. Now, the first thing you notice is simple. It's just nicer to use. The screen is finally the screen Sony should have had years ago. Now, small wish list moments here. If I'm being picky, I would have loved to see Sony push this closer to the A1 II style body, that slightly more premium flagship feel. But realistically, Sony took the A7 IV body and improved what actually matters. The grip is thicker. It feels better with the heavier lenses. And the screen is basically lifted straight from the A7R5, which is a massive upgrade. It's almost 2 times the resolution of the A7 IV. So no, it's not the full flagship shell, but ergonomically, it's better than the A7 IV, and I'm comfortable shooting with it all day. Now, honestly, that kind of sums up this camera. The camera inside, it feels more flagship than the body design suggests, and that's not the worst problem to have. Now, you also get the new 4-axis style screen mechanism the tilt, flip, rotate, low angles, high angles, vertical shooting. I really hope this becomes the new Sony standard moving forward. Now, here's another feature that sounds boring until you actually use it. 2 USB-C ports, one for power and high-speed data, the other for power delivery and USB communication. So that means cleaner rigs, less dongles, better workflow, and yes, full-size HDMI. It's just practical. Now, let's talk about why this camera feels so different in motion. The sensor. It's 33 megapixels, but this is a completely new, partially stacked sensor, designed specifically for the A7 V. And partially stacked actually matters, because rolling shutter is one of those things you don't think you care about until you see it. Shooting city scenes at night, panning past poles, buildings, railings, and suddenly everything bends. On the A7 IV, rolling shutter comes in at around 14 milliseconds in full frame 4K 24-25p. On the A7 IV, it was closer to 27 milliseconds. That's not a tiny difference, guys. That's the difference between this looks fine and why does this look cooked? Less wobble, straighter lines, and less of that cheap digital feeling. It helps everything. This camera can shoot up to 30 frames per second blackout free with full autofocus tracking. And then it kind of buffers out. Guys, that's crazy. Now, do I live at 30 frames per second? No, but I'd much rather have it when I need it than not have it at all. Now, there's another feature that absolutely deserves attention. Pre-capture. Now, this works both for photo and video, and it can capture up to 1 full second before you press the shutter or hit record. These are one of those features you don't think you need until you realize how many moments you've missed. On the photo side, the camera is already buffering frames before you fully press the shutter, meaning just half clicking. So when something happens suddenly, a gesture, a reaction, a moment, you're not late anymore. You half press, the camera is already rolling. And when you commit the shot, it reaches back in time, somehow magically, and saves what already happened. For streets, events, candid moments, automotive, wildlife, this is a game changer. And Sony didn't keep this as a photo-only option. Pre-capture also works in video. So the camera records up to 1 second before you hit record, which is massive. What is this magic? I mean, let's be honest. The moment you realize you need to record is usually already too late. Now, this feature perfectly sums up the A7 V. It's not about flexing specs. It's about removing human reaction time. And once you start relying on it, it's very hard to go back. Now, let's talk video. Most of my work is 25 and 50p. I want clean 4K, good motion, footage that grades nicely as I shoot S-Log3. The A7 V oversamples its 4K from a 7K readout. That's why the images look sharp without looking harsh, super clean, hair, foliage, city textures, all that good stuff, they hold up really beautifully. Now let's talk about 4K 50 and 60. There's an important setting here, and it's a little bit of a weird one. Angle of view priority. Now, the way this works is if you turn it on, you keep your framing consistent, but lose some in-camera noise reduction, meaning you're not gonna lose any crop. You're not gonna have any crop. But if you turn it off, you get about a 16% crop, but keep Sony's noise reduction. Now, I tested both, and for the way I shoot, I say keep it on. I'd rather deal with a little bit of noise in post than deal with framing changes and cropping in. And honestly, unless you're pushing ISO well past 12,800, you probably won't even notice much difference anyway. Now, 100 and 120p. All right, there is a few more things I want to cover, especially covering the 120 and 100p on the Sony A7 V. Now, I had a bit of an issue, which was interesting. When I first tried it on my first A7 V, it didn't work. It just kept saying you need a V60 plus or higher card. I used a V60, a V90, and a CF Express, and none of them for some reason work. I ended up resetting the settings on the camera, and the second time round, it actually worked. However, V60 will only work with 60 megabits per second, 420 in 8-bit. But if you want to get that 10-bit, you will have to use a V90 or a CF Express card. Now, the 120 works really nicely, but there is a 1.5 times crop, something to keep in mind. So what I would recommend is either get a V90 card or a CF Express card and you will be set. Now, I have two different types of cards here. So I've got this interesting brand. They don't make it anymore. Let me see if I can show it to you guys. Let me see. There we go right here. It's called Dajingu. I think that's how you pronounce it. And I've also got the Pro Grade, which is quite a standard. You guys have probably seen this one. The Pro Grade V90 256. Perfect card, works a charm, and it's pretty affordable. It's about 350 Australian dollars, so it's not too bad. But yeah, the V60s will not work for the 10-bit and 8-bit if it actually matters. The 420 60 megabits per second is probably not what you want. So just something to keep in mind. Otherwise, the 120 works really nicely. You can see a funny video of me doing like a Jason Bourne remake. Yeah. Anyway, that's all I got a chance to film in 100p, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. All right, back to the video. Yes, there is a 1.5 times crop, but it's not a deal breaker for me. 120p is a tool, not where I live, and sometimes that crop is basically a free zoom. Now, most of my work tops out at about 50p anyway. Now let's talk about stabilization, because this is important. Sony rates the IBIS at up to 7.5 stops, but the real upgrade for me is the dynamic active stabilization that I first saw on the Sony A9 III. Sony says it's about 30% more effective than the standard active, and I really believe it. Walking shots, handheld push-ins, shots that would normally be unusable suddenly work. They actually kind of feel gimbal-like. Now I first noticed this style of stabilization on the A9 III, and now I use it constantly on the A7 V. Now, let's talk about autofocus. This is where the camera feels more like a cheat code. It's hands down the best autofocus system I've used. AI subject recognition, human pose estimation, people, animals, vehicles, planes, insects. I usually just leave it on auto and let the camera do the work. It tracks, it holds, it's sticky, it gets out of the way, and that's the key. You stop thinking about focus and start thinking about the shot. Now, let's talk about overheating, because this is a big one. Long recording tests show nearly 3 hours in 4K 24 and over 2 hours in 4K 60 on a single charge with no heat warnings. Thank you to Gerald Undone for his tests. And from my own testing, that checks out. You're far more likely to run out of battery or storage than actually hit a thermal limit. Now, Sony achieves this with a Sigma-shaped graphite heatsink built into the sensor and IBIS unit. In real world use, I don't think about overheating. I just shoot. Now, low light. This is where people question me selling the FX3. The FX3 has a second base ISO of 12,800. It's a night monster. The Night King. The A7 V's second native ISO, however, is 8,000. Yes, you lose about a stop of dynamic range compared to the base ISO of 800, but for how I shoot, 8,000 is close enough. Now, I shot a lot of night footage at ISO 8,000, and all I can say, clean, natural grain, color holds, and even at 12,800, while it is a little bit noisier, it's still very usable. Now, on the photos, this surprised me. Video at 8,000 looked great, but photos at ISO 2,000 and 4,000, especially where they're a little bit underexposed, were much noisier than I expected. The good news, they clean up beautifully with some noise reduction in post, as you can see. I'm going to show you some comparisons. Now, let's talk about dynamic range, and let's keep this honest. You'll hear people say 16 stops of dynamic range. That's more relevant to photography.
And to be honest, it's a lot of marketing hype. For video, what matters is usable dynamic range. And in proper testing, the A7 IV in S-Log3 at ISO 800 shows about 14.2 stops in total, with around 12.6 stops that are usable. That's sort of the mid-range. And that matches real shooting. Now, you can protect highlights, lift shadows, but you still need to expose properly. For S-Log3, I usually overexpose by about 1 to 1.5 stops. That's usable 12-ish stops of range. Now, let's talk about color. Subtle, but better. Skin tones and reds feel more neutral than older Sony bodies, especially in mixed lighting. Nothing dramatic, just looks nicer out of the box. Now, practicality. This is why I'm calling it the best hybrid camera of 2026. Canon R6 Mark III can shoot 7K RAW. Cool. But 7K RAW is brutal. About 18 gigabytes per minute, over a terabyte per hour. OpenGate is similar. Big cards, big drives, big time. And most people don't need that. OpenGate, in my honest opinion, is overrated unless you shoot anamorphic. And if you need that, then I would suggest you buy a Lumix. The A7 V lives where I live. Hybrid work, paid jobs, personal projects, YouTube, run and gun, travel, documentaries, you name it. This camera pretty much does it all. And most importantly, it's reliable. Now, file sizes do matter. The A7 V gives you premium high 4K without destroying your storage. Predictable, manageable, and easy to edit. You have H.264 and H.265. Now, annoyances. A few quirks, some mode limitations. Obviously, no internal RAW or OpenGate. Would it be nice? Sure. And finally, let's talk about value. This is basically 90% of an A1 II for half the price. Yes, you give up 8K and no crop 120, but you gain a camera that feels designed for real creators. It's fast, it's clean, it's stable, it doesn't overheat, and the autofocus is insane. Battery life is much better. It's now optimized with the thermal heatsink, and you can walk out the door and shoot pretty much anything. That's why I'm calling the A7 V the best hybrid camera going into 2026 and even moving forward. You're gonna see me using this camera a lot more. Now, if you're on a tighter budget, check out my A7C II video. That camera is ridiculous for the size. Yes, it has a 1.5 times crop if you shoot in 50 or 60p, but for most people, it does everything you need for a fraction of the price. Think of it as a mini A7 V. And if you wanna see my favorite lens, click right here. All right, I'm gonna go shoot with this thing some more. See you guys on the next one. Stay safe and be well.